Good afternoon. I don't know which is the worst slot to have, the end of the day or the one just before lunch, when I can see people checking programmes, but I'll try and make this as brief as I can, but there are a few key things obviously that I would like to discuss with you. Thanks first of all to Edge Hill University for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak to you today. But obviously it fits in quite nicely with mental health awareness approaching. And Rochdale Sixth Form College is really a very new opportunity for students within the Rochdale Borough. But before I talk too much about the college, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself really. In terms of my role in education, I've been teaching now in various different positions for the last 18 years. So I guess in terms of exposure to students, there's been a whole mixture across ability ranges, across age ranges that I've had exposure to. In terms of the institutions that I've worked in, there have been two comprehensive 11 to 18 schools, which I guess you would term as fully inclusive, and dealing with students of, again, a range of abilities, but also starting to see increasing trends coming through of students that are just not managing to cope with the education that's being presented to them. And from my perspective, never really understanding how to make that more accessible for them. Often it came back to there's an issue with ability rather than anything more. In addition to that, and obviously Rochdale being the most recent one, I've worked in 3 different sixth form colleges. One of those relatively local, which is Winstanley Sixth Form College, which I guess you would class as academically high achieving in terms of intake. But again, the same problems were presenting themselves. And I guess it's from that that really tried to enable me to push myself to find out more. I wanted answers. I wanted to establish why such students were having problems and couldn't really move forward. And I guess the thing that has really struck me as we've gone through this is that regardless of the age of the student, regardless of the ability of the student that's in front of us, the one thing that has been consistently a barrier in terms of achievement has been their mental well-being. And on the back of that as well, the resilience to cope. Obviously with changes in education, reforms with regards to exams, moving to modular, having exams, 2-3 times a year for students. Pressure has been absolutely intense, and for many of them, they found it very, very difficult to be able to cope. And part of my job and part of my team's job is to try to make education more accessible for individuals and hopefully at the same time try to remove some of those barriers to learning that I've talked about. So Rochdale Sixth Form College. Rochdale Sixth Form College is a relatively new venture. Prior to September 2010, it literally was a hole in the ground, sat somewhere between a large Asda store and a competing college. But one of the reasons why the college was given the go-ahead was to address the significant underachievement within that particular borough. One of the things that had become apparent was that many students were either falling off an education programme altogether or were opting to travel out of the borough to try to access what they deemed to be an appropriate standard of education. And there's information in terms of a report that was produced by the Sutton Trust, and if you look at Rochdale, it's in the bottom 3 authorities within England and Wales for students progressing on to higher education. And this is something that I think is becoming more and more apparent, that when we talk about mental health, a lot of these issues are arising very, very early on in individuals' lives. And it's sometimes only when they reach us perhaps at sixth form, or indeed when they come to university, or the more worrying factor is when they've established themselves in the world of work and are trying to hold down a job, that these things become to the forefront. So the context of the college. In terms of our intake, very, very different from my previous place in that there are only 7 sixth form colleges that have less qualified students than Rochdale Sixth Form College. So when we talk about stigma and stigma attached to this, a lot of our intake automatically have a barrier in terms of belief and the belief of their ability to cope with an A-level programme. Obviously that's something that we've had to address. In terms of 150 local authorities within England, Rochdale was ranked 147th in terms of the average GCSE point score per pupil at A-level. So again, when we talk about barriers and we talk about challenges, we have that complexity, if you like, with the intake that we bring. Oh, no? Or was that you? Okay. In terms of we have obviously a number of partner schools that we deal with, but one of the largest partner schools is in the 10th most deprived ward in the country. So we're looking at not just issues in terms of belief and self-belief, but also for some students, background and poverty that's been faced has presented other barriers for those students progressing. And I was chatting a moment ago with Jake following on from his speech, but one of the things that we also have as an added barrier is the cultural diversity of the college. We have a real split in terms of ethnic backgrounds with about 50% Asian, 50% white intake. And I'm sure you're all well aware, but certainly within the Asian community, there is a real stigma attached to any kind of recognition, that mental health problems even exist, rather than, let alone starting to deal with how to comprehend and move forward from these. So the challenges. I think one of the things that has really struck me since starting at Rochdale is, yes, there are lots of statistics about the borough in terms of the region, the area, incomes, etc. And yes, there are elements in terms of financial poverty. But I think one of the biggest things facing our students is what we talk about in terms of poverty of aspiration. There just is not that belief there that they can succeed. And of course, that is a climate for mental health and mental well-being to prove a problem for those individuals. So one of the things that we try to instill in all students that walk through the door is building self-confidence and making them believe that they have reached our college, they're in a sixth form college because they are able to be successful. And that's been a real challenge for us to try to work with the students. The other big thing that really encompasses that is the support and guidance structure that we have in place. I'm fortunate enough to have a fantastic team of tutors that work with myself. We've got 13 tutors in total that are all very specialised in terms of their particular role, and literally walk through the 2 years with the student to support them at times of need. And the other element of that is trying to not shy away from problems that may be faced, but encouraging the students to build resilience so that at a later date, maybe as they progress on to university or indeed in the world of work, that they're able to draw on those experiences to use. So the story so far. I started my appointment at Rochdale back in May of this year. But 2 years prior to that was the first exposure I'd had to the mental health first aid qualification. And as you heard with the previous 2 speakers, it's kind of one of those moments that I look back on and think, why didn't I have this before? Why didn't I have access to this information? And so one of the things that I wanted to establish very quickly was a team of individuals within the organisation that had those same skills to work with students and to support them as they progressed. And that's literally where I guess the contact with Christine Clark has come about, in terms of Christine coming in during the summer break, much to the delight of my staff, to train them for the 2-day course in mental health first aid, and the response has been absolutely outstanding as a result. The next thing we wanted to do was to make sure that as the new intake came in for this academic year, that we integrated mental health and well-being from day one, so that the students were starting to feel comfortable talking about this particular subject. And so in all of the programmes now for both our Year 12 and Year 13 students, we are making links in every single session. We talk about credit and debiting mental well-being and so on, and really trying to encourage the dialogue as much as possible. In addition to that, one of the things that students found quite difficult at the start, but again, they're working with this, is we're having in the sessions, so small groups, about 20, 24 students, weekly meditation sessions with them, just giving them time out to relax, perhaps to reflect on their week. And again, that's seeing a positive response from the students and something that we're going to roll out further. I think one of the things that has struck me for this first academic year since the training has taken place is that I now have a team of staff who are very much more aware of warning signs and are actively having dialogue with students about mental health, and that in itself is fantastic. And I think one of the big things that we've looked at through all of this is that we focus on every single individual. We started off in 2010 as a very small college. We're now just short of 1,400 students. Rapid growth. And it's very, very easy for students to get lost within that as they progress on from high school, perhaps the familiarity of buildings and so on. So there's an awful lot of potential for issues to arise very early on in their progress. And although there is the excitement and the buzz for those individuals about coming to a sixth form college, and as I say, it's a new build, it looks fantastic, you know, students want to be there, I think it is very, very daunting. And I know myself with an 8-year-old child thinking about that next step in terms of high schools and the move from primary to high school. Is it really any different as students progress from a Year 11 student that suddenly, over the course of the summer, they have matured into a young adult that is able to cope with A-level studies? And I think indeed the same analogy can be applied when students then come away to university and for the first time are moving and living away from home. So ultimately for this particular age bracket, one of the things we feel is that excuse me, it's a very, very uncertain time for students. It's a time when things are likely to come to the forefront. If they've, can I get a bottle of water or something from somewhere? They've all gone. If we could get a drink, that would be great. Thank you. So, one of the pressures to succeed for these students as well is how their peers see them. And one of the things that we've been trying to promote is not necessarily, although it's great that we have a team of staff, don't get me wrong, what we want to encourage is these students to speak to each other, you know, to speak to family members, to speak to those people that they're with the vast number of hours in a day. And yes, the team have been great in trying to support that, but I think if you think about the pressure for these individuals coping with A-level studies and the progression from GCSE, combined as well with the fact that many of them for the first time are undertaking part-time work, also trying to balance a social life as well at the same time, there is a lot going on for them and potential barriers will arise. So one of the things we've tried to do, and obviously working with Christine over the next few months to have a really strong policy in place in terms of mental well-being, is to ensure that the pastoral structure in the college is there to support the individual. And that's something that we're really keen to push through as much as possible. That's a bottle of water and a half. So one of the things we're trying to do, and is part of the strapline of the college, is to instill self-belief. to make sure that every single individual that leaves us has that ability to progress at whatever level they choose to, be it into work, into apprenticeships, or indeed university. Just to give you a little bit more in terms of picture, since September, so we're talking 6 weeks, these are all the things that my team have been dealing with. The one thing that perhaps is quite striking here is the bottom one. We've had 2 students since September that have tried to take their own lives, one of which is still currently in hospital. That's the reality of mental health and what we're dealing with. And as I say, in a college of 1,400 students, it's literally tapping into the surface. These are the ones we know about. And I'm sure there's many, many others that we need obviously to still develop and have dialogue with. So final thoughts before you have your lunch. I think the first thing is this idea that no one should underestimate the impact that mental health and well-being has on a student's individual ability to achieve. And I think indeed it's been ignored for a long time. You know, it's simply because they can't cope with the academic demands. It's because they're not suited to a particular subject, when actually, in fact, that's probably the furthest from the truth. Creating a culture in which students feel comfortable talking. That's with each other, with parents, and with staff. And again, that's something that we're spending a lot of time working on and will develop over the coming months. And ultimately, I think we have a duty to try to equip youngsters to cope with the demands of the world of work. And the more we can do that earlier on in their education career, hopefully, the better it will be in terms of long-term outcome. You've seen statistics this morning in terms of rates of suicide, absenteeism, and so on. I think part of the problem is that these things are left undiagnosed very, very early on, when actually we could probably do something far more effectively very quickly. Thank you for listening. I'll take any questions if indeed there are any. Thank you.